The War Master Darkforge observed as the last of the enemy ships burned in the void of space. He quietly hummed a somber tune as he witnessed an entire species fall, a people too perilous to be allowed to live amongst the fearful creatures he guarded. His aides and crew stood silently, awaiting his orders. He nodded to his paladin. "We obey. Scorch their world, and may the Arbiter watch over them in their next passage." In silence, his ships unleashed the most formidable weapons his people possessed, offenses against the goddess and a terror to all. The crew watched mutely as the missiles approached the blue and white orb hanging in the void. His crest widened when the planet's counterfire managed to destroy many of his assets, but he was assured that no world can defend against an army that commands the heavens. Within moments, his fire began to strike, cruel nightmares that ignited the atmosphere and shattered the world itself. In less than an hour, the fiery inferno and dust storms had wiped the planet clean of 5 billion years of history, reducing it to bare rock. "This is not enough. I demand the planet be destroyed. Continue the bombardment. Nothing of their kind can be permitted to remain." His 1,000-strong fleet, every ally and co-conspirator, paused briefly before resuming fire on the burning planet. Many found it distasteful, assaulting a ruined world, but they continued the reign of destruction until the planet itself surrendered as his missiles breached the core itself and returned the planet to a molten ball glaring at him with hate. He had watched silently as his people added crime to crime, piling evil on evil. One more last and final sin to be done. "I want the moon hurled into the planet's remains, for who knows what they have concealed there." As his first weapons struck, they were met with silence. Then the moon seemed to glow, an ominous orange that quickly became a dark red. Then the moon shattered into millions of parts, a glittering rain of particles swiftly turning dark in the cold of space. He looked at his paladin. "Was that us?" The paladin looked at the numbers. "Director, I have no idea. I've never used these weapons before." "Probably?" The director watched as the hours passed, as the debris from the moon fell inwards towards the expanding ball of molten rock that had been a planet filled with life. He had seen enough. He turned to his crew. "Stand down and take us home. We have done our duty, and we will probably be cursed for it, but I never want to see this system again. Get us out of here." The director stayed in his cabin and continued writing his reports. So far, 11 of his ships had self-destructed for a mix of reasons, mostly guilt and some fearing the response of the dead. He knew his own people were not the type, but his allies were, well, gutless. They had destroyed the humans out of fear, and now they had discovered that fear is a deep well with no bottom. Now they were afraid of ghosts, as the humans' last transmission had filtered quietly out to the fleet. A simple transmission, and they were terrified. Fools. Dead is dead, and no one has ever been as dead as the humans. Within the Oort cloud surrounding the burning world, the moon's shattered remains awaited the enemy's departure. It made no effort to rescue the broken mining ships that had tried to defend the fallen world, as it had other priorities. Slowly, it began building a connection with home, a summons and a report that would bring retribution for a crime. It had issued the warning, and now it would allow humanity to confront its unexpected foes. Space is dark and ever ready to kill, and soon they would be the face of that darkness. Far across space, deep in the unexplored edges of a spiral arm, a light dimmed and briefly died, then revived with an ominous red glow. The AI responsible for monitoring the systems immediately reported the loss of a distant colony, and old weapons stirred from their uneasy slumber. The figure studying the report was vaguely human-shaped, but wrapped in restless metal, a skin that never stopped moving, breaking into obscure patterns as they absorbed the details. Their humanity was still sufficient to mourn the loss of so many children, so many brave souls who had risked everything to continue the great human adventure. They summoned their peers. "This is Commander Captain Stormcloud. I regret to report that one of our children's planets has been destroyed. It was clearly an attempt at genocide. They must be considered lost." The faces around them were equally strange, human now only in name and the ability to interbreed, the only rule that held the disparate mutations and alterations together as a people. One allowed tears to roll down her oaken face, startling white eyes peering out from beneath a dusting of green lashes. Who would do such a thing? Did we engage in some hostile act? Captain Stormcloud's face shifted with swirling patterns as he spoke. They were a first days colony, seeking our beginnings on a new world. They had little technology and only basic medical adaptations. Even our beacon was exiled to their moon, no threat to any spacefaring race. He spoke more gently, as the forest people were sentimental and easily upset, especially about their arboreal planets. Envoy Oakleaf, we will seek justice. I called to ask your permission to respond. One of the other members, an ice moon dweller who had largely given up breathing, slowly constructed a sentence. Response permitted. A memorial will be built, and the ice will sing for the lost. Envoy Oakleaf reacted with surprise at the lengthy speech, as the ice dwellers were known for instrumental music. Another voice, from a being plated in what seemed like fine mail, spoke. Permission granted. We must mourn the dead and seek justice. I assume you have a plan? General Steelbreeze nodded. Of course, I intend to take my fleet and investigate. I believe I can obtain justice for our loss and the destruction of a world. General Steelbreeze looked around briefly. The council is in agreement. I shall pursue justice. Each member nodded and signed their people's support. A quorum of war was established, and the mission approved. Envoy Oakleaf added a final remark. Recover their names if possible, and I will cultivate a forest, a tranquil place for their spirits to rest should they return. Safe travels, Commander. Captain Stormcloud sat back, his form merging with the ship, skin flowing into the seat and console. Applications soon flooded in from researchers, the curious, the angry, and the bloodthirsty, eager to join the mission. An old fleet voyage to a distant conflict at the edge of human space? This would be a remarkable research and entertainment opportunity. He vetted each applicant's social credit and references, issuing 100 passes while carefully ensuring their personalities would not align. Envoy Oakleaf felt uneasy as she approached Captain Stormcloud. Proper etiquette dictated acknowledging the commander as both the man and the ship. The vast, gently sloping dome only seemed to expand. She knew he had labored on it for millennia, a work of love akin to her forest domain. A lingering concern about the brutish Xenos she had unleashed had roused her from the soft greens of her home into this dark, metallic strangeness. She contacted the ship, announcing in clipped tones, "This is Ambassador Rowan, signatory to the Quorum of War, requesting permission to board, as is my right." Captain Stormcloud grinned as he replied, "Welcome, Ambassador. Your quarters are prepared, and I shall visit when you have settled in." Her needlecraft was seized by autopilot, interrogated, and then drawn deep into the expansive vessel, its liquid metal walls enveloping her ship. Eventually, it was carefully placed in a vast chamber, even as the walls sealed without any visible sign or marking to suggest an exit. Beautiful and practical, she mused. Her ship unsealed, revealing a forest. She drew a breath, the sounds and scents of her homeworld filling her lungs, and the dappled sunlight nourishing her now content leaves. She gazed upon the towering ancient trees, a sight that was truly real, not an illusion. Why had he cultivated this? She had no record of her people traveling with him before. She dismissed the why and resolved to express her gratitude. Her terror of space receded amidst such welcoming surroundings. In the Oort cloud around a burning world grew the true dark, the side forever hidden. The beacon was not just a call for help, it was a creature sent to watch, record, and guard. Rarely would it need to take form, even rarer that it would be permitted revenge, but this time, this terrible time, there would be no leash and no rules, save only one. It was permitted to exact justice from the people that had committed the atrocity, not the governments, not the civilians, just anyone that stood on a ship or pulled a trigger. Then it had been given the blessing of the Quorum of War. From the ragged and broken rocks, it drew what it needed to become the walking nightmare that mankind always knew rested within. Its figure flickered as it tested its camouflage. Guns blighted nearby rocks as it refined its techniques. Plasma picked out specks of dirt from dark space as it rehearsed its algorithms. Blades were crafted and blackened, tested against the stone itself. The flickering image it had sent as a warning now become real, a face as cold as space, and a heart as stony as the asteroids it was forged from, as pitiless as the creatures that had earned its existence. Harbinger raised his face to the universe, fully real for the first time, filled with the pain of watching those he guarded die as he was held helpless by their rules. The nanites that had carefully built him had finished their job and had left a trail for him, lines bright in the dark for him to follow. With a final message to the Captain Stormcloud, he resigned from the human race and went to work. He wrapped the dark around him and left his failed post for the last time, carrying only weapons and vengeance onwards. The Shant Council meeting was as grim as he had anticipated. There would be no heroic welcome for his bloody work, only the sickening feeling that the nation, his nation, had tarnished itself in the name of some nebulous fear. A planet-bound species reduced to flaming rock, a few miners burned from the sky. This was not a tale they wished to hear or retell. Still, recount it he must. Council, as per your orders, I have destroyed the uncontacted race that called themselves human. Since they were in no position to do much more than throw a few rocks at us, we suffered no casualties. He allowed the silence to linger. One of the council members shifted uncomfortably and began, "We gave you those orders because the race was perverse. It could not be allowed into space." A murmur of agreement came from his colleagues. Indeed, it was at the insistence of our allies. It would have been political suicide to refuse. The Director of War nodded. Indeed. How could we bear the shame of not committing genocide and annihilating a race so very different from those we understand? Those spears looked quite sharp, and those miners were quite difficult to kill. Thankfully, you gave me 1,000 ships to do it. He slowly peeled his rank from his shell and dropped it on the floor. I believe the galaxy must now be free of all threats, since you sent me against such terrifying opposition. I hereby resign. Perhaps the Arbiter will forgive us, as she tends to do. I, however, cannot. One of the council, unwilling to be so easily dismissed, held up a copy of the warning sent from the beacon that they had officially ignored. Is it? The speaking stick was struck down with unnecessary force as the council was dismissed. The question was left to linger in the air. The Alliance learned that while fear is a small thing, that ghosts are a children's tale best told in the dark, and that there are many monsters that can quickly become friends. Sometimes the true darkness draws nearer. The genocide had quickly become a silent shame, the threat of revenge a slow drumbeat within the creatures that had ordered the deaths of so many. Questions were murmured, sometimes to an empty room. What had they done to be so destroyed? Hidden was the unvoiced fear that perhaps it could happen to them. The clips of the fleet melting the world into molten rock, of the destruction of the moon over an offense never even declared or understood. They had been given no reason but their very existence and died for it. Others delighted in the victory, the death of a cancer, the destruction of a threat foreseen and dealt with quickly. How many would have died if the humans had reached space? From out of the dark, Harbinger followed the fading path laid by the nanites. A shipyard loomed ahead of him, the obvious destination for whatever ship he had followed. He had no information yet. He slowed his approach, wasting a day to stay out of sight of any sensors, and then drifted gently into what seemed to be the normal approach to the stations. He left his sensors on passive, hunting the right ships and then making his plans. In the shipyards, the mood was grim as they returned to sullen silence and strange rumors. The announcement that the Director of War had resigned sent another message to the old hands on his ships. More than one put down his tools and walked off the ships, throwing their military identification into deep space. They had heard the threat and they knew what they had done. The nights seemed darker, the world smaller than before. Harbinger alighted upon a vessel. He was awaiting confirmation before he acted, but he recognized it. This one had fired 8 million kilotons of ordnance at his planet. He unsheathed his primary blade and prepared to meet the destroyers of all he had been sent to guard. Blood for blood. He sought their identities, for they had never been asked. He wished to remember, for that tempered his rage. They had killed the nameless, but he would not. No, he would slay the known and wear their skin as a trophy. A simple torn panel, and he descended silently within. Harbinger found himself in a dark vent, hearing only the hiss of chilled gas sweeping through the pipes. He inhaled a deep breath and analyzed it. Oxygen was running at nearly 30%. He chewed through the numbers, running estimates on what that could mean. On Terra, that could indicate large-scale creatures or some seriously inefficient design. Gravity was around 0.7, so it could be both. He would investigate when he had a sample. Time to begin. He punched a hole through the vent and dropped the 3 meters to the floor. A quick scan found several doors nearby, one with what passed for security around here. He did not bother with the camo, merely moving to his hunting pace. The door was some composite metal, useless against him but sufficient to block any audio. A surprise then. He compelled a probe into the security system, swiftly overriding the lock, pushing silently to open it. Now he could hear the mumbled grunting of his enemies, so he pulled his blade closer and pushed open the door. Captain Stormcloud nodded and smiled. "Thank you. I had hoped you would cherish this place as deeply as I do." He allowed his gaze to wander, savoring the tall, verdant trees and the calls of irritated wildlife, then took a deep breath. As a child, I loved the forest, even as the call of space grew louder. I'm old enough to remember the forest burning, and I made it my duty to guard the green places. His eyes hardened to dark steel. "I have news, Ambassador. Would you hear it?" Without her noticing, her roots began extending into the soil below, bracing for a storm. She nodded. The commander inclined his head. "The Harbinger has become itself. It has agreed to my terms and has begun seeking justice for our people, its children. If you are willing to listen, I can tell you what I have agreed. But the Harbinger will not change its course. It has resigned from humanity." Rowan shivered. "Since when do we allow weapons to resign? Do axes get to choose if they wish to chop? What have you agreed?" Silver kept any sign of humor from his patterns. Those who live their lives in contented peace tend to look for the sharpest stick when things become difficult. He was a soldier and measured his response with a more professional eye. "Rowan, it is no weapon. It is a broken-hearted parent cast in steel and vengeance. It will seek out every Xeno that stood on a ship and destroyed its home while it was helpless to intervene. I estimate the most damage it can do is 200,000 casualties, possibly a little more, but it is content to let me speak for our dead when it comes to the rest." She bent as if an ill wind had hit her, her leaves furling as if in a frost. "So many. What are we setting upon these people?" "Always this, too hard, too soft, too much or never enough." "Ambassador, that represents less than 10% of the number of families it just lost. I would kill them myself for the slaughter of one of our worlds, but it will teach them terror. It will remind them that they drove our people to hide and die and then burn their very world. Mercy is for those you wish to forgive. I will not grant it, and the Harbinger is merely their first lesson." The stain of steel covered his skin once again, the softness of the forest forgotten. "I guard the verdant realms and our children who play within, and I shall see them answer for their cowardice." Harbinger listened closely, the vents whispering the locations of those hiding and stifling their sobs. He had sealed the ship, declaring a full quarantine and isolating the crew from the salvation they believed awaited them beyond. The foolish AI had not even realized that the infection itself was the one calling for quarantine. He dimmed the lights further and caught a reflection from one of the panels. He was a dark figure, splattered with various fluids. He was what they had made him, a blood-stained shadow of his people, a ghost of their ideals. He burned off the blood before something could use it to track him and paced slowly towards the cubicle where he sensed two creatures struggling to suppress their weeping. His blade was keen, and he had time before they finally breached the ship. Today he would teach them fear, even as he had cried out while watching his children huddled in the dark, weeping as their world burned around them until the very air was flame. Rowan stood in silence, trying to comprehend the situation. Despite the commander's words, she harbored the same thoughts, though not as easily articulated as a soldier. It made sense to her that Captain Stormcloud remembered the burning of the forests, an attack on her kind by an unthinking machine race, long in the past and long extinguished, but the first time that humanity had truly united and decided to face the universe as one. A bond now stronger than any steel, yet taken for granted. Even she had forgotten that others had kept the skies safe for her and her people, careless as they built playgrounds and beauty that enriched them all. She uprooted her deep-set convictions and allowed the vengeance of the forest to fill her. Blood would nourish the soil, that something wholesome might grow. She would not condemn one as broken as the Harbinger, not when they had reduced his people to wretched, shattered remnants. To the bitter end, to justice if possible, but to revenge if that was all that remained. The universe had all but forgotten the scent of smoke, but she remembered all the carefully buried memories of her tears watering the burned nursery she had tended. Her choices echoed within her. She trembled slightly, a shiver running across her leaves. She swore silently. This was the price of immortality, that eventually one could become anyone, even a bloody Triffid. The Shant Council was displeased to be summoned and had yet to appoint a replacement for the recently deceased director. It was tragic that his hearts had failed so suddenly after his retirement, but they had given him a state funeral. Several states had, in fact. Amazing how many people had taken an interest in his sudden end. The council was aware that many were still asking questions. The councilman currently holding the speaking stick had been dragged from his home and was not feeling particularly charitable. "So why exactly are we here in the middle of the damn night?" he demanded, striking the stick with enough force to rouse several of his dozing colleagues. A fleet commander stood at attention before the council, unmoved by the noise. The Xeno was cold-blooded, stiff in its uniform life support. "Council, I must report that we have lost a vessel," it stated. The councilman waved the stick. "What? Why am I dragged from my home because we lost a ship? We have millions of the damn things. Am I never to sleep again?" The Xeno seemed to consider that. "Sir, that may well be true. I know it's going to be difficult for me for a while. The ship we lost was in port, the Haven of Fire, a Corsair-class ship with a crew of 80. Mixed species. It was in for a refit after the human problem was resolved. It had expended all its supplies and had served well, so frankly, no one noticed it went offline. We are still trying to piece together how it happened, but I must show you what has occurred." It was clearly from the perspective of a single entity. The council watched as it broke into the ship, as it began to hunt down the crew, as it broke into a secured room. They saw the knife, a thing of darkness, and then it found a crewman. Most of the council was still vomiting when the recording paused. "Council, this was sent to me by name, to show you what it was doing. It held that ship for 9 hours, and recorded every kill, every butchery. Each crewman was stripped of their face, its skin was taken for some unknown purpose. It also left a message. A promise, written in blood with excellent calligraphy, had been made. 'You will all fall to me,' it was signed Harbinger." He resumed the recording, believing that if he had been forced to watch it, so too should they. The Haven of Fire was now surrounded by heavily armed Marines. Following the initial investigation, a group of pale and sickened medical and police staff had left the ship under escort, completely silent. Afterward, armed men in full biohazard suits sealed the door, apparently awaiting orders. Harbinger watched silently, fully hidden and hovering 300 meters above the ship. He could wait, knowing the next target and willing to be patient. He spent the time reviewing the data he had extracted, mapping the events and a list of casualties. A new group arrived, stern-faced and cold-blooded, at the ship's port. "We come from the council. No one is to pass this door without my personal permission, and nobody, and I mean nobody, leaves unless I am standing here. If they try, you shoot, and you shoot to kill." The creature's icy demeanor radiated from a lifetime of government service or waitressing, and the biosuited guards quickly nodded in agreement. The Shant Council read the report in silence. They had seen it happen, but this was something else. Their experts had mapped the destruction and injuries, making it clear the intruder had overcome and subverted security within the first few minutes, yet had chosen to prolong the crew's suffering for 9 hours of hellish murder. The current speaker offered the stick to the group, but found no takers. He sighed and spoke of what he had read. "We have awakened a demon from old. This is beyond anything those humans could have created. This is beyond us." One of the other council members shook his head. This is a new threat, an attack on one ship. This is not a war. This is personal. We have ships and crew across 1,000 worlds. I vote we secure the area and pursue this threat. We can evaporate the damn star if necessary." The rest of the council nodded in agreement. The speaker spoke. "Very well. I will appoint the fleet commander as director and instruct him to hunt this thing down. He shall have whatever resources are required." Silence fell in the room. No one believed it was over. Captain Stormcloud summoned the 100 witnesses to watch as he arrived at the graveyard of a human world. The walls turned to steel, then pulled open to reveal the burning remains of a once vibrant planet, flaring rock and shattered hope. He addressed his audience. "Solaris, a world we had crafted from dead soil and made beautiful as a gift, as a promise. All man is man. They wanted to explore our beginnings, live with the rain and the dirt, hunt and gather, live the life that we were first designed for. Many of us have grown up in such worlds, finding out what it is to be human." He closed the walls. "Witness this. We stand in arms against such cruelty. They have burned our children beyond recovery, and we can only mourn and seek justice. I will be scanning the system to its very edges in the hope that someone survived and in the knowledge that none could have. Because we must always have hope. Then I will bring the full force of our people upon those responsible until they are sorry that they ever learned how to make fire." The cold steel of his eyes met the fury in his voice as he vowed justice on those that had chosen to burn the green spaces that man had built. One of the men stepped forward, so observed and recorded. He bowed a little and added, "I will conduct the memorial service for those lost, Captain Stormcloud. Until then." The crowd dispersed, leaving him alone with his grief and his plans. Harbinger listened as the enemy made various cunning schemes and smiled. He had left them his next objective, concealed beneath the shallow soil of a partially deleted file. It had taken them a full day to locate it, and he watched as they summoned their Marines to guard it. The ship, the Messaclip, was a battleship-class vessel swarming with a massive crew, 4 times the size of the Haven of Fire. It had immediately launched from the station and moved into a close orbit of the local sun on full alert and with scanners active until the emergency drill was over. The crew had, in one way or another, discovered what had happened to its sister ship, and a not insignificant number of crewmen had failed to report. Military police were pretending to search for them, but instead they drank together in silence, ignoring what they had all witnessed. The recording had reached everyone, even the bartender, and a strange, waiting silence filled the shipyard. They observed as the bodies were removed from the Haven of Fire, sometimes in quite small bags piled together. It took Harbinger only a moment to track down the Marine transport being sent to defend the Messaclip. It was not even worthy of a designation, merely a serial number. It would soon be etched into the memory of anyone who heard of it for the next 1,000 years after his intervention. He quietly boarded the Citadel-class Marine 3008 and waited. The ship had a central command post behind the best of armor, room for 200 to 400 soldiers, and excellent defensive capabilities. Harbinger pulled himself deeper into the vent and waited for it to depart, polishing his blades and cleaning his weapons as he anticipated the ship's departure beyond reach of aid. From the dark and silence of the bar came a drunken, angry voice. "We should have left those humans alone? What the hell had they ever done to us? Poor bastards didn't have a chance, and I dropped 1,000 kilotons of atmospheric burners on them. The Arbiter isn't going to forget or forgive me for this one." The silence greeted the voice. The military police simply drank deeper and disabled their communications. A single gunshot echoed through the bar. Captain Stormcloud stood solitary as the witnesses resumed their endless bickering. His focus remained on the weapons foundry, crafting every nightmare and pondering its use. Much he returned to the furnaces, mindful of the scars he would leave on the future. The punishment must fit the crime, and he held no mandate for genocide, nor the will to carry one out. It was akin to navigating the endless foes Earth had confronted since the dawn of the expansion, nearly 12 millennia ago. A mere blip in the existence of mankind, yet a combination of immortality, FTL, and gene-og had created a reservoir of ways to inflict pain and death, including several to end the universe itself. Captain Stormcloud reached within and retrieved the flint arrowhead he had found as a child, a talisman and promise. He found it curiously entertaining that he might identify with the creature that had crafted it. If they kept to drinking beer, they might even discuss the properties of flint. He favored chert and greenstone, but the connection would be genuine, and then they would have used it to slay any scoundrel who had burned down a village. Harbinger began by silently slipping to the citadel itself. It was not difficult, for the troops lounged around the front of the ship, and the pilots had neglected to close the doors. This vessel lacked a true captain, only a marine commander and a pilot who pointed the way. It was almost enough to raise a smile as he triggered the command to seal the citadel and activate the alarms. Then he waited, invisible to the crew. The two pilots were suddenly surprised by the fall of anti-mill doors and energy shields, the lights shifting to emergency as the power plant was locked down, and their consoles displayed a wholly new menu, one they had not seen since their boot days. Then the communications lit up. "Sir, I don't know. I didn't trigger it." Frantically pressing buttons. "Sir, it needs you to be in here. Or you need to be Well, you need to be dead." "I don't know, sir." The pilot watched as the ship slowed to 1/3 speed. "Sir, I'm trying to troubleshoot it. This is a Citadel-class ship. The whole fucking point is that you can't get in. With respect, command in here falls to me. Look after your men, and I'll call you." He continued his efforts to regain control of the vessel. Harbinger unveiled himself with a grim smile. "And you can't get out. My name is Harbinger, and you burned my world. We need to talk." He drew his knife and began. The Marines couldn't hear the screaming through the armored doors. Harbinger pushed the remains of the pilots into a neat pile and evaporated them with his plasma, and then sat down, making himself comfortable at the command console. He watched the Marines outside run around like some headless fowl as they tried to force open the doors. It wouldn't happen unless he allowed it. The whole point of the vessel was that it couldn't be taken while the Marines were busy boarding some other sorry bastard. He contemplated his route to the mesoclip, estimating he had around 4 hours before he was in full scanner range of the ship. Time to silence the soldiers outside. He started by cutting off the grav plates throughout the ship, and then immediately put the ship into a spin. He sat comfortably as the G-forces built, passing beyond anything organic life could withstand, and gave it an hour, turning the ship into a blender. Outside, the soldiers were being flung at increasing speed into each other, into every wall and every fitment. He watched with interest until the cameras were blinded by spray. Then he turned the gravity back on and steadied the ship. Softly whistling, he released the defenses. The thick doors swung open silently, leaving a smear across the floor. It was covered in scorch marks and dimples from weapons fire. He gazed at the new decorations that the corridors were coated with, mostly bits and blood. It wasn't exactly the personal approach that he preferred, but creating a mess would convey his message. He ambled through the ship, ensuring none of the bits could speak or move, taking the odd souvenir until he was certain no one would be sending out any inconvenient signals. He burned off the mess currently sticking to his feet and concentrated on the next part of his plan. Captain Stormcloud had prepared for the service, organizing the witnesses and their requirements. Now he stood beside Rowan, preparing himself. In front of him sat 3 altars recovered from the wreckage of the world. Stone, ice, and soil. They had been recovered by one of the witnesses, a human that had chosen naked space as its environment and disliked interiors. It felt this was a suitable demonstration of its grief and solidarity. Captain Stormcloud agreed. At Rowan's request, it was taking place in her quarters, and the soft, green, and gentle breeze seemed to gentle the mood. No one forgot that they were here on a mission of death and vengeance, but it reminded people of their better selves. The man that stepped forward to conduct the service was tall, thin, and gray-skinned, wrapped in a dark robe. He stood in front of the altars and paused, waiting for the conversation to dwindle. When he was satisfied with the quiet, he began, "Welcome to the family of man. I am called Shadow Seeker, and today is a dark day. I too spent my early life on a children's planet, running with spears, hunting, and rejoicing in our beginnings. My own children are doing so today. To witness such a place so brutalized fills us with horror, yet we cannot act as children ourselves. I ask you to reach out to me and let us join in our grief, our distaste for what we know must come, and seek absolution from humanity itself." Captain Stormcloud closed his eyes and tried to center himself. Psionics wasn't something he ever dabbled in. He felt his own mind and motivations needed enough work without peering into other people's inner selves. Still, he felt a certain relief when the minds around him were joined, and he found himself in the company of his peers. Once the alterations were stripped away, he sensed the humanity in the room in a way that mere appearances could not convey. The Mesoclip was currently impatiently waiting for the Marine ship to arrive. The captain had been provided with the full, lurid, and confidential description of what had happened on the Haven of Fire, and the reassuring presence of a few hundred Marines might calm down his crew, and himself, if he had to be honest. He flinched at the memory of the celebrations on board after they had eradicated the humans. A battle with no consequences or risk? It had been a pleasure to use so many restricted systems, forbidden by tedious treaties, until they had been sent as the wrath of the goddess on the perverted creatures. Now it seemed they had an equally perverted guardian, and it was coming for his ship. He snapped at his comms officer. "Where are they? I want to speak to the Marine commander." The comms officer acknowledged, "Yes, sir, they are within communications range. Hailing now." The consul began buzzing impatiently as Harbinger returned from his walk. He grinned slightly, sensing the Mesoclip's growing concern. He constructed a virtual environment and took the call. The comms officer saw the scowling face of the Marine commander, now spread across 3 decks, and hesitantly reported, "Sir, the captain wishes to speak with you. Connecting you, now." The captain was pacing his office, feeling the pressure of the situation as he hadn't in years. "Commander, what is the status?" Harbinger replied with a sneer. "My status? Surely you haven't missed my ship approaching? Or have you forgotten your orders to maintain radio silence until I arrive?" He leaned in. "I know you prefer not to face this alone, but alerting the whole system that you need a babysitter won't help your career." He pulled back. "I'll be on your ship in 2 hours. Stay quiet, stay put, and I'll be there to assist you. Have your senior staff meet my ship. I don't want to repeat myself." Harbinger ended the call. The captain stood in silence, deflated. The crew dispersed, each lost in their own thoughts. Captain Stormcloud and Rowan remained, and Rowan remarked, "The reality of war is never as simple as the idea of it." Captain Stormcloud nodded. "Thank you. That information was most helpful. Please inform me if any further matters require my attention." He bowed to Rowan and departed. They watched him leave. Rowan turned to the tall gray seer. "So, your assessment? I ask as one of the quorum." "This is my war," she reminded him. The seer grasped her hand. "Then I shall show you." The imagery was slightly peculiar, almost like a half-remembered dream. "Your mind is interpreting the information I provide," the seer explained. She closed her eyes, sensing a rough wind through her branches, dark clouds and storms on the horizon. The sense of burning, dying trees, and dead ground. Silent weeping, then rage. She felt herself merge with her community, seeking blood payment for an atrocity. The disciplined fury of Captain Stormcloud stood out, driving the battle, unwilling to see the green places fall again. She saw the spear in his hand, his shield held high. Her people wrapped themselves tightly around him, becoming a banner on the spear, a license. Rowan opened her eyes and looked at the seer. "Thank you." She bowed and turned away. Citadel-class Marine 3008 requesting docking. The captain had remained in sullen silence until the ship arrived. He would address the commander on his own terms, on his own ship. He hadn't felt so humiliated since he was a junior officer crossing a senior NCO. He commanded a battleship. He exceeded the Marine commander's request and filled the landing dock with his ship guards in full armor, as well as his officers. He knew it was childish, but he still sent the orders. He also scanned the incoming craft until the paint began to blister. Then he decided to wait on his bridge and meet the insolent Marine from his command chair. Harbinger had disembarked the Marine ship as soon as it passed through the sensors. He relayed the docking commands even as he made his way behind the assembled crew of the battleship, and then he waited. He was eager to witness this encounter. The ship arrived without incident or resistance. The troops waited, wondering why they had been roused and sent to the armory for this. It was merely the Marines. Still, they held their ground. The silence drew out as no one opened the hatch. Uneasy shifting and fidgeting filled the vast room. Nothing and nobody moved. The captain grew impatient. Clearly, the Marine commander was awaiting his arrival. He should have spoken up, but the damned creature had made his point about signal silence. He curtly nodded at his bridge staff and strode off to meet the blasted soldier. The landing docks were utilitarian ramps and offices clustered into an efficient machine, lacking in particular beauty. However, they possessed the military pomp that demands a proper entrance for the captain. His personal guard hurried behind him as he marched to the hatch and waited. Nothing. Harbinger grinned. The crew remembered the blood and then the stench. As the captain had ordered the hatch opened, a flood of gore had seeped out of the ship. They saw clumps. Then they saw the walls. They saw the captain begin to retch as he tried to wave them away. Then the smell, a smell that filled the room and entered the vents, sharing it with the rest of the ship. The captain's guard grabbed him and began dragging him away, the second ordering them out and calling for medics. No one moved, held by the horror. Then they remembered that they were military, proud upholders of the Empire, and drew their weapons, ready for anything, nearly anything. From the speakers set in the walls, from their personal comms, and from somewhere behind them, came a slow clap. The cadence filled the room until everyone turned, searching for the cause. It seemed to come from the shadows, shadows that weren't supposed to be there. Someone thought to fire, or their trigger discipline was shot. It didn't matter as plasma flew into the dark corner, someone had thought responsible. Mindlessly, they all fired until the clapping stopped. The office and its occupants were devastated until a measure of discipline was restored. The frozen silence held until the NCOs started shouting, and they were shuffled off the dock, out to spread horror amongst the rest of the crew. He had been assured by the medics that there would be no lasting side effects. It was simply shock. A few days' rest and some therapy, and he would be fine. He stared at them. Rest? That monster is on my ship. The captain pulled himself away from the healers and began closing his uniform. He spoke sharply to the doctors. What I need is information. What happened to my Marines? Captain Stormcloud let his mind settle. He had done all he could to reassure his peers that he wanted justice, not revenge, although the difference wasn't going to be apparent to his enemies. He sealed the ship, becoming one with it. It was a relief to be whole again. He aimed at this council world, the primary target of his wrath. The council was a shouting match, starting with the report regarding Citadel-class Marine 3008 and working up from there. It was one ship. Now we know where this thing is, we can kill it. We all knew this was going sideways, and one battleship is going to end this, one way or another. I have assets in place that can destroy the whole damn system if we need to. Stop bitching about some Marines. Goddess knows they're no loss to the gene pool. This prompted a sudden silence. Several members of the council had come from the Marines, and they didn't appreciate being treated as cannon fodder. The council member waved at them. I'm sorry, you know what I meant. They were dead on arrival. Whatever this creature is used them as propaganda, another trick to terrify the fleet. I regret their loss as much as you do, but it changes nothing about the tactical situation. He paused and threw down the report. We can't even bury them properly, not with this. And this entity now resides in the Mesoclip. What can we anticipate next? What new recordings will infiltrate the fleet until we have no crew left at all? The reproaches continued until a senior staff member approached the stick holder and whispered in his ear. Security measures dormant for generations suddenly activated, and the doors slammed shut. The very chamber itself began descending hundreds of meters below the ground, an unfortunate occurrence for the decorative trinkets and cherished portraits on the walls, as they were abruptly ground to dust. Much of the furniture also fell loudly and shattered. The chairman stood unsteady as he was and announced, Council, we have an incursion into the system, and we have reason to believe it is hostile. He paused for a moment as he tried to recall the words. A vessel of approximately 10 kilometers in length and width has arrived in orbit. It is unknown to our security or intelligence community. I await further details. He sank into his seat and clutched the speaking stick. He nodded to the staff member. Inform them. The staff member, unfamiliar to the rest of the council, spoke with a certain gravity. He nodded. A vessel, a sphere of some kind, has arrived and is currently situated in low orbit over our world. Anything approaching, including the home fleet, has been destroyed. We have no intelligence on the species or the vessel. All we are receiving is a countdown, indicating it will make contact late tomorrow. I cannot recommend evacuation as nothing has been permitted to leave the atmosphere. I am here to answer any questions I can, although I believe that summarizes the situation. Captain Stormcloud almost felt remorse as the foolish ships attacked. He appreciated the bravery, but it was outweighed by the sheer foolishness. It took a moment to extinguish the idiotic machines and sit quietly in low orbit, particularly since a few warning shots had grounded anything leaving the planet. He kept an eye on his kill count, just to ensure he did not ruin his introduction. The council viewed the final footage of the home fleet. The staffer's calm voice relayed the details. The alien vessel is a 10-kilometer sphere, though its true dimensions are uncertain. It shows no weapons or propulsion and left no trace of its arrival. All ships that engaged it were destroyed by massive internal disruptions that breached our defenses. If it so desires, we may not survive the day. I require your orders for the rest of the Empire. Do we surrender, fight on, or establish a colonial government? Harbinger observed the chaos engulfing the ship. Weary, angry, and confused crewmen were armed and told to fire at will, leaving them even more bewildered. Whispers of past disasters spread, but this was a battleship, not a skirmish. Disciplined officers rallied their men, posting watches and rotating duties, while others drove their crews to dangerous choke points. Harbinger joined the effort, disguising himself to pass through a checkpoint where the lieutenant had devised a clever system to disarm all who entered. The NCO eyed it and moved his hand to the trigger. "Drop it, or else." Harbinger grinned and dropped it straight through the NCO's foot, and as the man cried out, Harbinger snatched the creature's gun, firing through the man and into his two crewmates before they could react. As he stood amidst the bodies, Harbinger picked up his knife and did his homework. He began whistling softly, an old melody from the planet these men had ravaged. He was likely the last to know it, and that fueled his anger. The council had achieved nothing, spending their time searching for a way off the planet, and when that was denied, refusing to hand over authority to anyone. No matter how slim the chances of victory, they would share the spoils of defeat instead. Barked orders to the military produced no results, as they had read the same reports hours before the council. They sat in sullen silence, waiting for the countdown to end. For the end to begin. The clock ticked slowly down. 9 hours. Harbinger began his plan, starting with the navigation office. He knew exactly where this ship needed to go, and now the door was unguarded. A simple strike, and it flew open. Surprise! The 6 crew stood stunned as a dark figure burst in, its 2 blades glinting. It spoke. "Today is a good day for you, although likely quite short. I'll let you run. If you reach the escape pods before I count to 10, you may leave the ship. Isn't that generous of me?" It stepped aside, gesturing to the doorway. "Run!" The crew hesitated for a moment, then Harbinger raised his knives, and they fled the room. He pushed the door vaguely back into place and smiled. He hadn't lied. They could reach the escape pods if they moved quickly. He had programmed them to jettison in 20 minutes, all pointed directly into the local sun. But they would have time to feel the pain, time to repent of their actions. He planned the same for the rest of the crew. Today was a day of fire. The math was complicated, and not all the systems wanted to cooperate as expected. He had to break quite a lot of it before he was satisfied with the ship's trajectory. The crew had abandoned their posts without logging off, which proved advantageous. He double-checked and, now content, then disabled all the ship's systems that could interfere. He had whimsically termed it his dead man walking strategy, eager to see how it would unfold. Now for engineering and the engines. The hatch to engineering was far thicker than anything else on the ship, and he paused. He wanted that door. It was a fine door. He reviewed the transmission from the captain and adjusted his demeanor accordingly. The cameras were already under his control, so he simply knocked. The squinting creature on the screen seemed surprised to see him. "Sir, you are not supposed to be here. Like, ever. How may I assist you?" Harbinger adopted the same fearful expression the captain had used when awaiting the Marine's arrival, and whispered, "I'm bringing my guard here, and we will wait for the fleet. I've ordered us home, but the creature is interfering with transmissions. Please, open the door." Behind him appeared the image of his armsman arriving, looking nervous and heavily armed. The engineer was not one to pick a fight with his own captain, but this was almost too much. Then the door began to slide open as the captain stumbled in. "Thank you. My men will stand guard outside." The door closed silently behind him. He began wandering the department, annoying the crew. He asked foolish questions and pretended not to understand the answers. He poked at things that made tails twitch and scales itch. He hit buttons that shouldn't be hit. He pulled levers that shouldn't be pulled. Finally, the chief engineer had had enough. "Sir, can you sit down? Something is wrong with the ship. Surely you have better things to do." Harbinger settled comfortably at the console. He had already achieved all he had intended in this department, the button pressing having served its purpose. He smiled at the engineer. "Truthfully, I merely wished to see if I could accomplish this. You, creatures, you are such a dull evil. I wondered if I could send you to your reward without you even noticing. And here we are. Tell me, Chief, when you operated the weapons that devastated my world, did you ever ponder the reason behind your actions?" As he spoke, his body grew darker and larger. The engineer stammered, "What? Captain, wait. What are you? Oh no, I'm so sorry. We simply follow orders. I'm sorry." He already knew it would not help. Harbinger withdrew a small weapon and nodded at the engineer. "Apologies are insufficient." He pulled out a pistol. "This one took some time to calibrate with your shields, but it should provide a memorable moment, for me at least. Your weapons stole all the air on my world, and it was not a pleasant sight, so I thought you would appreciate experiencing it firsthand." He smiled at the confused crew, some of whom were rushing for the unresponsive door. It was a fine door. Harbinger leaned forward and added, "Farewell." He sat and watched as men, equipment, in despair, were dragged kicking and screaming into the small hole, no doubt smearing themselves all over the nice clean space outside. He had been surprised how long some of these creatures could hold their breath. Something to remember for the next time. Then he returned to the consoles and turned off all the stupid alarms and refined his earlier work. He wanted to be absolutely certain they received the full benefit of his lesson. He had debated staying on the ship, but this close to the sun and with failing systems, he could not be sure that the rest of the fleet would receive the transmission. He would have to watch this one alongside them. Perhaps he could provide a running commentary. That could be entertaining. He enlarged the opening in the ship and retreated into the void. The captain was already in disarray, freshly emerged from the medical bay and accompanied by 2 healers in case he needed to be relieved for medical reasons, or if he lost control again. "Sir, we've lost navigation and engines. Engineering is not responding, indicating a vacuum in that department. I've dispatched a security and repair team to both areas, awaiting reports." The captain did not tremble. The ship must be shuddering. He snapped at the bridge crew. "Stabilize the damn ship. This shaking is distracting." The crew exchanged glances and pretended to adjust some settings. "Aye, sir." One of his crew cursed and hurried to another station. He signaled for assistance, and within a minute, the entire crew was frantically tapping their consoles and whispering to one another. The captain asked wearily, "What? What has the creature done to us now?" The frigate Consul of Grey, with just under 1,000 crew and a respectable battle record, was sharp, well-disciplined, and accustomed to heavy odds. It had even enjoyed a bit of planet burning, though the captain seemed displeased. He was a growly and bloody-minded scour, full of honor and regret. When his comms officer pushed past the others to report an illegal stream being pushed into the system, the captain beckoned him in and listened. "The Messaclip is under attack?" The crewman hesitated. "No, sir, the Messaclip is doomed. The human ghost has seized it and sent it towards the local sun. They aren't the ones calling us. It's the creature. It wants us to watch." The captain aged visibly. "So it begins. The goddess is never going to forgive us." He straightened up. "Can we rescue? Are we close enough?" The crewman shook his head. Too far, and I'm not sure the crew would even obey the order. As I said, the mesoclip is doomed. No one is responding. I checked, and the fleet is abandoning the system. Gossip says they're going to use a sun killer on it. The captain dismissed the crewman and looked thoughtfully into the future. The council would fall for this, but there would always be another council. Unless this wasn't the end. Why just attack the fleet? Perhaps because the big guns were on their way somewhere else. One creature was paralyzing the fleet. What would a nation of them do? Another world of meat-eaters? He had despised the orders when he had received them, but he must be on a list somewhere. Another of those who had burned an innocent world. He scanned the list of the 1,000 worlds and picked one that might suit. He began watching the stream, watching a battleship fall apart and the burning begin. He didn't wait 9 hours. All hands, new orders are sending us far into the 1,000 with little prospect of return. We will be making one stop in, he checked the star map. 8 hours, disembark if you wish. He pulled full ship control to his office and sealed the door. He was going to do the only sane thing and run. Within the battleship, the temperature continued to climb. No matter their efforts or the number of men sent, they could not fight the sun or vanquish a ghost. Rumors of a cooler spot reached the crew, and they rushed towards it. Arming all crew members only turned the situation into a bloodbath. The heat drove some to madness, while others literally burst into flames upon touching the walls. All semblance of sanity was lost until a low voice crackled through the comms. What of the Citadel sitting there? Perhaps you could escape on that? Harbinger cackled at the suggestion, using the chaos as bait to encourage the murderous crew to reach the ship that had once been their horror. He ensured the cameras captured the insanity that followed as the crew slaughtered one another to board the vessel. Pity he already had a plan for that ship, though he would not be unkind about it, as it would save him a trip. He waited until the retching, bleeding survivors launched the ship, then made himself comfortable on the hull listening. After an hour, one of the men, squirming with discomfort, had pulled off his biofiltered mask and endured the smell of cooking meat. What the fuck? Sarge, is it getting hotter in here? One glance at the grinning thing outside told them the truth. They hadn't escaped. Hell was taking them home. Fuck! Emergency broadcast. Senior ranks only. Sunkiller failed. Unknown interference. No alien traces were found. Declaring emergency missing Sunkiller. Battleship, Mesoclip, and Citadel recovered. No survivors. Creature, unknown hostile entity, is assumed to still be active. Rowan stood beside Captain Stormcloud as the timer ran down. She was fairly certain he had a plan, though not entirely. Mostly, she was there to see what would unfold. 4 kilometers below the Council world's surface, the Council waited. Suddenly, a dark presence arrived. It approached the stick holder, wrenching it from his hands and then savagely tearing his face apart. Fangs ripped at him as he fell, his screams echoing in the now sealed room. Then an androgynous figure rose. I believe this is how you conduct diplomacy. Perhaps he may require medical attention? The attending staff, including bodyguards and medics, rushed in and saw the damage. They ignored the stranger and hurried the chairman away. The figure nodded at the support staff. My apologies, but I felt little purpose in killing them today. The figure seemed to solidify, becoming a metal biped with an ever-changing pattern in place of a face. You declared war, and I am here to ensure your defeat. The figure picked up the blood-soaked stick and tossed it to a random councilman. Here, speak. The councilman caught the stick and in a moment of fury slammed it down. You are new to us, an aberration. We have done you no wrong. He looked at the blood on the stick. He had done you no harm to die like this. Why do you speak of war? Captain Stormcloud turned to his familiar face, recalling his childhood in the forest, the days of innocence before the burning. The same face he had shown the seer. You burned our children. You burned our green spaces. We are human, and we are legion. He raised a hand, carefully touching the podium. I will send you the terms of your surrender. He paused. I see from your notes that Harbinger has been busy. He will never stop. You probably shouldn't have killed his family. He is no longer human. The countdown reset, and Captain Stormcloud returned to himself. Rowan was waiting for him. A bit dramatic, wasn't it? Captain Stormcloud regarded Rowan with a grave expression, finally nodding. Rowan, I was the one who poured the healing waters on your family. You have no idea what I intend to do to these people. He appeared to grow more imposing, darker, and more intense. But many of them are about to perish, and I feel no remorse. I will burn them out of space. He paused for a moment. You were little more than a child at the burning. Go to the seer and tell him I permit you to see my memories. He can show you the true meaning of war for us. He claimed to be one of those damned humans and said we burned their children. What have we done? That ship could destroy us all in a day. The sudden collapse of the podium surprised them. The spot where the human had touched had burned a hole that had spread. Reluctantly, they looked around and saw the same breakdown spreading. Small cracks that seemed to care not whether it was steel or plascrete, paper or wood. The human affliction was ravaging their chamber. This, then, was the countdown. 9 hours. The end was near with only one chapter left. He added, and of course Harbinger will cut his way through their worlds as he sees fit. I see no need to impede him. They will have learned many valuable lessons, such as... His voice rose and sharpened, and the faintest echo of his rage showed. Such as do not burn down one of our worlds. Do not even approach our children with the means to do harm. Rowan listened carefully and slowly nodded. That is remarkably kind of you. I might have preferred more fire, but I expect Harbinger will provide that for me. The seer nodded. Seen and witnessed. Perhaps they will have learned to share the galaxy when you release them from the prison they have built for themselves. He looked sharply at Captain Stormcloud. You have matured since those trials. I'm proud of you, my child. Captain Stormcloud nodded. Thank you. Now, if you don't mind, I have much to attend to and little time to do it. Rowan raised a hand. Peace. I asked the seer to show me your memories, to understand why you became a creature of metal and war. You are correct that I was a child, although it did not feel like a childhood. I saw forests burn, but I did not see the war. I did not see the price you paid when you left the green for the black, that you broke the bodies of our enemies and used the cold metal to build something better. I did not know that this ship was made from the corpses of our enemies, so that you could guard our green spaces. I simply wished to say thank you. She bowed low and headed towards the great trees that he had grown upon the enemy dead. She wondered what she was supposed to feel, because she actually felt herself strike the bare metal floor a little harder and smile. The faint smell of burning that always seemed to be in the air now explained. Harbinger received a communication from Earth, not a true call, for they had no interest in speaking to him. It informed him of what was about to transpire. It told him he could continue his work if he chose to, and provided him the crew lists of every ship the enemy had sent against his world, and where he could likely find them. He found himself in agreement with the strange justice. He had never met this Captain Stormcloud, but he got the sense that he had carried a knife in his day and had become something more. For now, he had a blade and a battleship to kill. Captain Stormcloud knelt and carefully brushed the dirt from the fourth altar that had been recovered from the destroyed planet. This one had not been blessed. It was an altar of metal, and that would remain with him and be added to his ship. He carried it to the weapons foundry and watched it melt into the vast reservoirs he maintained. Soon it would be needed again. He began by sending the other 3 to the quorum, ice to the musicians, stone to the spacers, and soil to the forests. To each their own. Then he began casting the interdictors, battleship-sized machines that would enforce the sentence he was about to pass. He felt having one in orbit over each and every world would make the point faster than a simple message. He crafted them carefully and made sure a little bit of the new iron was included on every ship. The council had been recovered from the failing depths of the palace by many sweating armsmen. Some had not been able to make the climb, and all that remained stood in bewildered silence. They had ruled 1,000 worlds, and now it was turning to dust in front of them, literally. They had seen the cracks spread, the fall of much of the edifice, and now they found the chamber itself was simply gone. Now it was in their clothes, in their scales and fur. The human disease was eating them alive. The human thing appeared. They had long since lost track of the hours. Their screens had failed long ago. They simply stood in a bitter silence. Captain Stormcloud looked at the tattered remains of this vicious government. Killers of children. He laughed. It sucks, doesn't it? Someone you never met, never offended, suddenly seeks you out and destroys everything you care about? It was much simpler when you didn't know we would find you. That it was bigger than you could imagine. That it could happen to you. You have damned yourselves, even as you sat and read reports of the strange creatures on the edge of your space and thought to kill them. We have done the same. Each and every one of your people will know of your failure. Some will even pray that your children die young so that they may return to space. No, the time has come, and we will meet your people when the last of you has departed. This time, I hope you will offer an open hand, and trust me on this. I will be there to witness that day, and I will stand in judgment. I and the 85,000 other human worlds. The 9 million orbitals, fleets, and habitats. You are doomed to oblivion, as is your empire. He returned to his ship and began overseeing his new fleet as it made its way into the low orbit of every planet of this fallen empire. Then he set an alarm and went to meet with the witnesses, who likely had questions. The creature was old, its scales faded and chipped. Someone had polished them roughly before he had entered the village house, but he appeared lost until he found his seat and ate the soup greedily. So, today I tell the tale. I will speak of when the stars fell silent and why. He croaked a little. Ahem! We were a people of wonder, 1,000 worlds under our reign, until something came out of the dark for us. You have seen what they did, the great pit that was our city, the single bloody star that watches us and deafens our cries for help. One day it will fall, and we will rise against them again. They called themselves Human, and they are creatures of metal and hate. Long did their god of death walk amongst us with its dark blade. They say even the Human feared him until he had filled his thirst and returned to the dark. Rowan felt the weight of her years, her limbs stiffening and her core heavy with accumulated memories. She had pondered change, but nothing had seemed to pierce her spirit. The seer's arrival, summoning the quorum of war to witness the end, had taken her by surprise. Time raced by, it seemed. They sat above the sealed worlds, one that had, in their distant past, dared to burn a human world. Rowan felt only sadness. How long has it been? It feels like an age. The seer nodded. To us, a couple of 100 years, give or take. To them, an eternity. Captain Stormcloud sent them back to a new beginning. She glanced at the scanner. Where is he? He said he would be here for this. He even wrote it down somewhere. The seer replied, Yes, I suspect he is on his way. He tends to ponder these matters deeply. He has an ending in mind. 1,000 ships over 1,000 worlds watched as an old woman died, and the sentence was ended. Blood red faded to bright blue, then flickered away. A message was sent to those who could hear. The stars are open to you again. This time, come as friends. There won't be a next time. The 1,000 ships, united and shattered, waited and watched, unforgiving. But the alarm rang, and the summons came. Over the council planet they converged, the one that guarded the green spaces becoming whole once more. They witnessed the ships colliding, the light outshining the sun. Rowan smiled, her leaves rustling wildly, and she squeaked, He's home! She glanced at the seer. You don't need to tell him I said that. The seer bowed, his gaze turning to the future. It was good that his son would find such happiness. No longer concealing his presence, the creature had practically announced his arrival from the rooftops after years of successful hiding. That was fine, for his knife still worked, and a century of effort had not dulled his thirst for vengeance. The people knew the human god of death now walked among them, and the military and police had locked their doors, praying to their goddess. Harbinger scarcely noticed as the populace fled, for the consequences of interfering with his mission were severe. The town was a once prosperous commercial hub, now reduced to a state of agrarian subsistence. Likely, they had a ruler and hastily rebuilt infrastructure, with water and wind now powering the planet. Harbinger grinned, having been angered by the sentence imposed upon him. He had desired death, bloodshed, and flames, until realizing the true wrath of the quorum. This day would mark the end. The quorum had informed him that this was the final crewman he was permitted to sentence. He had traversed over 1,000 planets and a century of human time to track and eliminate 111,000 murderers. It had been easier when they had remained in their ships. He had achieved such high numbers in the beginning. Thousands in a day if he reached the reactor and cooked them slowly. Simpler times. The air was clear, and he could detect a single life form. The sky was darkening to a deep silver as the human shield blocked the planet, banned from even seeing the stars they had betrayed. The more he contemplated it, and that was practically his sole purpose, the more he believed humans were greater scoundrels than most realized. Not the Shant, obviously, they had met the sharp end, but the rest of the oblivious galaxy. And him, of course, literally the sharp end. The door was open, swinging lightly in the breeze. A child's toy had been left to keep it ajar. Subtle. Unfortunately, his eidetic memory meant every record of every human child huddling under a bed as the air burned never improved, never faded. "Ah, you found me at last. It's about time. What happened? Stop to kill a few random civilians on the way? I'm dying. Nothing you can do to me. An hour or two won't make a difference." Harbinger pulled up a seat. "Good. I'm in no hurry. You are the last crewman alive, so I suppose you get a medal. I could never uncover why you were on the ship. You hid your records well. A Corvette, not exactly my first choice of target. Well, definitely not my second." The creature spoke. "And that's where you were wrong." It cleared its throat loudly and then resumed. "I was responsible for small arms, small caliber, anti-personnel, anything like that. We shot your people like it was a festival. We took bets, and I won." It grinned up at him, the ragged scales showing. "I was skilled at hitting the smaller targets. It was easy when you worked out how they ran. And now you are here, full of revenge and your knife. I'm not frightened of your blade. My doctor has given me only hours to live, and I wanted to spit in your face." Harbinger stayed silent for a moment and then spoke. "You think you were the worst? You are nothing compared to some of those I killed. You are sad, hiding for your entire life under our bloody moon. I am here to exact justice for your sins. You know them better than I. I don't give forgiveness, and I am not here to dispute your evil. I am here to kill you. My task is simple and inevitable." He reached into his belt and produced a very small blade. "However, I can introduce you to new concepts of time and pain. To admit to me that you hunted my children, and you being my last target, I feel this will take a while and you can tell me all about what you did." The screaming began. It lasted a lot longer than his doctor had estimated and ended with him skinless and bleeding out. Harbinger played the sound of the children that the creature had murdered as it died. Captain Stormcloud watched from orbit as the last murderer fell to the Harbinger. His shattered self would soon reunite and look to the future. However, one last task. Once the creature had died, he summoned Harbinger, and they faced each other for the first and last time. He nodded and said nothing. Harbinger smiled. "Fine, I'll say it. End me. This is over."
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. And for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.